welcome to episode 5 of Nourishing Tomorrow, the future of food systems. I am here with Kafui Adjagaste, Senior Innovation Manager from IDH Hub, where we will be looking at how the food value chains can be transformed to meet client demands. Karibu.
Asante Sana, it's a pleasure to be here, Prudence, and thank you for welcoming me to AJRF this year and also to Tanzania. It's great to be back.
Yes. So, Kafui, when we say client in the food systems context, what does that mean?
So traditionally, I think most people would talk about client from the perspective of the consumer, but for us in the ethos of our work at IDH and within IDH, the unit I represent, FarmFit, it's very important that we also see the farmer as a client, a business partner, rather than just a beneficiary.
So now a farmer um, has has
It's
grown
12
to
hours.
become a client, a business partner, and not just a beneficiary.
Yes, exactly. And the reason why we say that is farmers, yes, they're at the start of the food chain, but they also demand things themselves. They demand services, they demand training, they demand finance, they demand inputs. And we see there's a lot of opportunities and a lot of need for service delivery to smallholder farmers in order to allow them to flourish in their business.
Amazing. So now tell us a little bit about yourself. And also, what do you enjoy the most about your line of work?
Yes, that's a great question. So about myself, so I've been working in this sector and at IDH for the last 5 years, but I cut my teeth in the banking sector and also worked for a short while in economics. But I've always had an interest in understanding the economics of different companies, of individuals, understanding how things work from that perspective. And what really attracted me to this sector is not only from the core of wanting to give something back or wanting to really try and use my abilities to try and resolve some challenges, but I'm also just hugely attracted by complexity and the challenges are huge. And the challenges are huge, but there's progress being made, and being able to contribute to that progress is something which I really want to strive towards going forward.
Amazing. Now let's discuss progress. Could you share with us what Africa is doing to transform our food value chains in order to meet the client demands?
Yeah, so I think what people, and I'm based in the Netherlands, I think what people often don't see so much is the level of innovation that is happening, particularly among SMEs. So the level of innovation in terms of how services are being provided to smallholder farmers, innovations around seeds and varieties, and it doesn't necessarily need to be the most fundamental, sexy, exciting innovations, but also just doing lots of little things right in union, and there's lots of vibrant businesses which are making a lot of progress, and we work across many countries in sub-Saharan Africa, and we see these examples of kind of transformative business models which are working with huge numbers of farmers. They're meeting their own client demand on downstream the value chain. They're meeting the demand of their farmers. They're starting to create these win-win situations, and those organizations that I call them transformative business models, but when you look at them, they're not necessarily doing anything crazy. They're just doing all these little things right. They're innovating on a small scale in the correct manner.
Awesome. I want you to tell us more about these little things that you're talking about, and bring also to the fore of our imagination one transformative business model that you've seen across your work in sub-Saharan Africa.
Yes, okay, so I would say of these little things, and really to draw on the work which we do in IDH, and a resource that we've just launched called the FarmFit Insights Hub. You'll capture a lot of more detail of the ideas which I'm about to say, but I think For instance, we know that farmers have a problem in accessing smallholder finance. So there's a lot of business models which are structured in a way where not only are they working on their own, but they're working with a coalition of different businesses in order to generate this access to finance as well as other services. So farmers, for instance, they sign a contract, or a farmer organization signs a contract with an off-taker. This contract is used to go to a bank to apply for a loan, which in turn can provide input to the farmer. And then the little things which come right is the inputs are provided on time, the loan is available on time, the farmer's supported with extension services at the right moments in the season to really be able to put the inputs into practice and to put their farming practices right. And then at the end of the season, the company that is there with working capital to be able to acquire the produce, and then this is repaid back to the bank, and it works out for everyone, and there's a lot of collaboration. And to be very particular about one transformative business model that we've been working with, I don't want to put them on the spot, so I won't name their name, but yeah, we have one in operating in southern Tanzania, in the Southern Highlands, who's been doing this very well. They've reached now 40,000 farmers that they're working with. They're using data themselves, so we're very keen on the use of data. They're using data themselves through a farmer management information system to better know who to provide, what type of services to provide to their farmers, and how they can better engage with their farmers.
Amazing. So you leverage data to understand what are the demands of your client, who in this case is a farmer, and then you provide the services from farm all the way to the market. That's the model.
So not exactly our model, but that's the model of the companies that we work with. So what we do in particular is we started to look at what we refer to as service delivery models. We started to look at them around 8 or 9 years ago, more from a business perspective. Sometimes it could be an SME who's providing training and inputs. Other times it could be a global organization who has a sustainability program where they're also doing some of the things, perhaps giving inputs away for free. And our thinking at the time, or our organization's thinking at the time, was this is not necessarily always sustainable, how it was being done. Often there would be a project, people are trained, people are given inputs for free, the project ends, everything falls away, and impact starts to backtrack. So our logic was, if we start to look at this from a more business focus, so we look at how can this service delivery be done more efficiently, so how can it be done at lower cost, how can you make sure that it's more effective, so it creates more impact, and ultimately how can this start to be commercially viable so it doesn't need subsidies to go forward. And to do this, we needed data. So we started to collect a lot of data on all these different business models, and now and also the farmers they serve, so now we've got probably millions of data points, and what we've been doing over the years is, like, as we've now got to over 120 business models we've analyzed, we start to be able to see a lot more rigorously what are the key trends, but also what are the best practices, how different businesses that we then work with, how they can take the lessons of others in their country, but also others from different contexts, how they can take that to improve their business models, and then their clients which they serve, both being the farmers on the one side and their buyers or the market on the other.
Amazing. So we're still exploring how we can transform these value chains to meet the demands. You've mentioned a couple of key trends have come out of your data points. Can you share just one key trend and then one very transformative best practice? Okay.
So for the first one, I'm going to back up my earlier point in that a lot of people in the sector think that you shouldn't charge farmers for services, and service provision, service delivery to farmers is just non-profitable, and it should just be done as charity. But we see that 30 or a third of the companies we work with are recovering more than 70% of the costs that they have on services. And that's not even including the benefits that they gain on sourcing activities such as the volume they acquire. So that really gives us, it really gives a lot of, it does two things. It gives a lot of faith that this is a viable business, and by allowing companies and encouraging companies to charge a little bit more, we also see that they're able to reach bigger scale. So they're replicating that impact because they're not necessarily doing things for free. The other side is it makes us think that and particularly the development sector, there's a pervasive culture from the development sector where maybe we have been distorting the market in some ways, where maybe we've been giving things away for free too much, which is making it hard for other organizations in the space to be competitive, but it's also not contributing to the type of impact that we would like to see.
Amazing. So once the service delivery to the client is effective, that will definitely transform the whole food system.
Yes, I think not alone. So I think there's multiple things which need to take place. So yeah, service delivery, of course, proper procurement practices to ensure that the farmer's getting a fair and decent price. I think in Africa particularly on the global value chains, getting more value addition into Africa is important. Enabling environment is very key. So having the right policies in place, infrastructure, for instance, irrigation, rural roads, these type of things are incredibly important as well. And then just more sector coordination among the different parties.
Amazing. So when you look at the different nodes in the agricultural food chain, which ones do you think are the most attractive to youth?
So I hope that I'm still young, so if someone asked me would I want to be a farmer, I kind of struggle, because I think, first of all, it's hard to, and even in Europe, it's hard to acquire land. It's always expensive, and I know that the youth have a lot of problems in acquiring big enough parcels of land. It's also a very high-risk venture. Farmers take a disproportionate amount of risk for not that much value. And I think that might not necessarily be so persuasive to the youth in order to engage in farming. But where I think where there's a lot of opportunities for the youth is a lot of roles which are really fundamental to kind of developing farm-level activity and developing these value chains. So not only in the factories, but also roles such as transport. And one innovation that we've been supporting and we've been observing and tracking is the role of agents. And a lot of companies, say a company is working with 20,000 farmers, they have their own staff, but we've also encouraged them to work with agents who they pay on a commission basis. And normally these agents perform multiple roles. They might help with input distribution, they might help with training and extension and procurement, but there's other tasks such as spraying of fertilizers and pesticides, pruning, harvesting, and these roles are quite well positioned for youth. They tend to benefit those who are more mobile. It gives a lot of more flexibility, and often companies will provide the assets, such as maybe a motorcycle, to allow youth to be able to do this. So it doesn't require the land, and it doesn't necessarily create the same risk as it doesn't have the same risk as being a smallholder farmer.
I hear you. So youth are very key, especially when it comes to mechanization, industrialization, agribusiness, processing,
Exactly.
being agents to farmers, smallholders, all the way to large-scale farmers. So what can be done to ensure that now we absorb more youth into those nodes that you've mentioned?
Yeah, that's another fantastic question and a very difficult one. I think there's many things which can be done. I think part of it, it requires multiple sides. So part of it can go to the private sector, and one example which I've seen is of a company in Kenya who started their own apprenticeship scheme. As
For young farmers or for like
for
young agribusiness players?
So for people who wanted to perform different roles, and a lot of them being youth, and their take was that they need more skilled labor because they found that there's a skill shortage for different elements. So they found there's a skill shortage for their own staff, whether that's someone who's operating a farm, whether that's someone who's operating machinery, whether that's someone who's training farmers, and because of that, they were like, okay, we need to start to bridge this gap. They were like, lots of people are coming out of university, but they don't necessarily have the appropriate skills or the more practical skills which are needed to translate into agribusiness. So they invested in this apprenticeship scheme, whereby there's different pathways. So some people can go to more management roles, some people go to more specialist roles. I think that's a great example at company level, but we also see the business schools who are operating for more leadership levels. We see government programs where people go into government service. In Ghana, where my family is from, people go into public service where they're also trained up more to help perform these roles.
Amazing. In Tanzania, we have the Building a Better Tomorrow initiative that is really centered on absorbing more youth into the agricultural sector. Now, let's
Fantastic.
look at the regional trade. What's its role in transforming food value chains?
Yeah, it's a hugely significant role. So a paper that I had the benefit of co-authoring a few years ago called Unlocking Regional Food Trade, we looked into the potential of regional food trade in Africa, and actually some of the initial research that we did was really kind of outstanding. The amount of the size of trade between on agriculture between Africa and the rest of the world completely dwarfs or at least at the time, and I think still is the case, completely dwarfed the amount of trade within Africa. And what we see is there's a lot of areas where one country has a trade surplus, another country has a trade deficit, and Africa probably won't be able to become fully self-sufficient, but the amount of import dependency at the moment could be hugely reduced by improving regional trade.
Awesome. How do we improve regional trade?
So multiple things. I think key to it are, so I'll focus on, let me say, two main things. I'd say one is infrastructure. So because of particularly road infrastructure and the lack of rail infrastructure, the cost of transport in Africa tends to be much higher than other parts of the world. So that makes African products more or less competitive compared to say importing rice from Southeast Asia, yes, or South Asia. Another thing I would say, it's not necessarily policies. I think policies are there. It's the implementation of those policies. Policies around trade policies, but also standards. Standards such as health standards and customs procedures.
Amazing. Standards are really key, and I believe if implemented well, are going to be very transformative for the top part of the food value chain. Yeah. So now my next question is on infrastructure.
Yes.
What are the current and future infrastructure investments needed to improve post-harvest handling, storage, and processing techniques to make African agriculture competitive and reduce importation?
Yes. So again, I can't reiterate so anymore, but rural road infrastructure is important. Cold chain storage and storage in general, but ensuring that storage capacity is used. So I think better coordination of activities alongside infrastructure is important, because in some instances that I've observed, there's a huge need of storage, and then in the same region and district, there's lots of empty storage around and it's not being used. So ensuring that the capacity of these storage facilities is used and better coordinated is important. I think, and that would help reduce post-harvest losses. I think to kind of create more stability within and more security of supply for a lot of value chains, irrigation infrastructure is really necessary. We've seen in this region the last few years the impact that drought has had. The companies that we've been supporting in this region, we've seen the big fluctuations which can happen in the supply which they're able to get and how they can fill their factories from a result of there being insufficient irrigation and delayed rains or lack of rain.
Amazing. Now let's go back to a policy. What do you think are you mentioned about the importance of policy implementation and coordination. When you look at Africa as a whole, which governance mechanisms and coordination are needed to enhance market linkages, especially for small-scale farmers, and also reduce food losses?
Yeah. So I think one which I think is important is around market information. So if I focus on smallholder farmers, a lot of them have market linkages, but they're suboptimal market linkages. So they're market linkages to traders and middlemen who might take a more exploitative stance on them. And this comes from multiple factors, but one of these factors is often the lack of access to market information. So systems or ways of improving how market information flows and how it's made available to smallholder farmers, so whether that's coordinated also through government extension services, or it's coordinated with NGO extension services or company extension services, but making sure that these different initiatives interact in providing the right information on markets to smallholder farmers, I think is a great way to resolve some of those challenges. But obviously, a lot more needs to happen.
Amazing. When you were speaking about storage, what came to my mind is the fact that do the farmers or the clients in our case know about these facilities? Because probably if they knew, they'll even increase their yield because they know they have a place where they can store effectively their crops. So that's a very good point. I want to ask you one question before we close. When you were speaking about storage and sorry, I lost my train of thought. Okay, so when you're looking at market information, what's the most Nanza Tena? I want to ask you one question before we close. When you're looking at marketing information, what's the most effective way for marketing information or the information in the market to reach to a small-scale farmer?
So I don't want to necessarily sit here and say there is a single most effective way, because at least what we've seen is things are always context dependent. So in one context, it might be that you pass information through a digital platform, and that might work in Kenya, for instance, where mobile phone penetration is really high and people can get information that way. In other contexts, it might need to go through farmer organizations. Maybe there's strong, powerful farmer organizations to pass that. In other contexts, you might need radio, for instance. It has to adapt to context, and there are some lessons which we can learn across the different contexts. So there are things that we learn, and in the resource that we've just launched, the Farm for Insights Hub, there's a lot of information there. But what we also recognize is that you can take these learnings from other places, but you have to contextualize them to what's most effective in those regions.
Yeah, contextualization is very important. What are your summit expectations?
My summit expectations. So I've been having a great time. Actually, I sit around gathering inspiration from a lot of people, and it's different to some of the other events where there's a key outcome or agreement. What I just find really inspiring is the the vibrancy, the amount of connections, and I think for us, we've been working a lot to build this resource. We've been working a lot with different organizations over the past 8 years, but we want to expand that reach because we think the information that we have ultimately helps improve others' decision making. But it's not just that we've got something to offer to them, they've also got something to offer to us in terms of how can they improve our offering to the sector.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
have a quick fire questions that I want to throw your way.
Yeah.
It's fact or myth. The first one is, climate change has no impact on the resilience of food value chains.
So that's a myth. Yeah.
Food value chains are resistant to adopting data analytics and AI for optimization.
Also a myth.
Last one, food value chains can remain unchanged and still meet evolving client demands.
That's a myth too. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time, Kafui.
And thank you.